good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this pale blue dot that we all live on. My name's Adam-Antium, you're the audience, and you're listening to this edition of ATZM Podcasts. I'd like to thank everyone for listening, I really appreciate it. Just the usual announcements, for those of you listening to this on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. And if you want an MP3 version, down below in the video description you'll see my TalkShoe link to download all my shows for free. Also, just the usual plug that I like to give is for the book The Zeitgeist Movement Defined, Realizing a New Train of Thought. It's essentially the comprehensive guide to the train of thought that the Zeitgeist Movement advocates. If you want a copy of this book, you can find it at thezeitgeistmovement.com. You can either download a PDF of it for free, or if you want a physical copy, you can. There's some links for Amazon Europe, and bookpatch.com, and you can get those there. I've personally got my physical copy. I actually bought one at one of the London Z-Day events. So, say you go to a Z-Day event, chances are, if they're a large chapter, they're also, selling copies of the book. So I got mine there. But that you can do that there. Also, another announcement. Very happy to say that Chapter 3, Threshold, the final short film in my trilogy that I've called The Sweep, is now done. So you can find that up on YouTube if you like. Just search for Chapter 3 Threshold or through my YouTube channel, youtube.com/AAUTZM. You can find that there. But yeah, I'm very pleased that I finally got it done. It's a roller coaster ride akin to any sort of psychological thriller, I suppose, but it's condensed down to about 8 odd minutes. I'm quite pleased with it. It's even got a little bit of CGI in it as well. So, but yeah, you can find that there, and I've also entered it into a festival, which I should be hoping to hear back from soon. But speaking of festivals, coming up soon is going to be the 5th annual Zeitgeist Media Festival. The main event is in Australia this year. It's in Australia. It's going to be on Saturday, 17th of October 2015, at the Rumpus Room in Brisbane, in Queensland, in Australia. But for more information about that, go to www.zeitgeist-australia.org/zeitgeist-media-festival. And for info on past events, the Zeitgeist Media Festival, go to www.zeitgeistmediafestival.org. Just for those of you who don't know, the Zeitgeist Media Festival is essentially a gathering of socially conscious artists, whether it's musicians, comedians, filmmakers, painters, whatever, right? And just a big celebration of socially conscious arts, and also each event should function as a resource drive of some kind, whether it's a clothes drive, food drive, whatever, right? But yeah, that's the long and short of it, because art and the emotional impact of artwork itself, that can offer a sort of key into laying these seeds of thought, at least in a sort of philosophical sense, that yes, it's a good thing that we care about humanity, and that we feel that motivation to share compassion with other people. It's difficult in our current culture because we're taught to intrinsically mistrust people, or distrust people, sorry, because essentially in the economic system they are your competition, right? If you have a friend that's also in the same profession as you, especially if you live in the same area, then you are economic opponents. You are economic opponents of each other, and it doesn't matter if you're friends. Your livelihood depends on you screwing that guy over, right? And doing better than him. Your livelihood depends on it. That, and there's also the profit motive in there as well. But that's why socially conscious art is so important, because artwork, even from religious cultures, have been massively awe-inspiring. I mean, the very grandness of particular melodies and rhythms that certain pieces of religious art music has had. It's not like all religious music is bad music. There is some awesome music that is made by religious people. So it's not necessarily whether any particular approach to art is good or bad per se. It's what sort of things that the music wants to promote in general. What sort of seeds of thought can it lay? Not just in terms of people thinking about different ways that music is played or different ways that art is expressed, but also the different ideas that the art expresses. But anyway, it is my unfortunate, just coming on to more graver announcements, it is my unfortunate task to inform you that Desert Island Digs is now no longer our sponsor, since the company was forced into bankruptcy. It turns out that the demographic this appealed to were actually so antisocial and xenophobic that they prefer to live thousands of miles away from other people on a desert island. And when, unfortunately, when human beings, forced to flee conflict and tyranny, ended up washed up on their island beaches, the residents opted for abandoning their haven from humanity back down the pipe towards the mainland. Hopefully these people can learn that they cannot escape the global problems of humanity because they are solved by us working together. Swings and roundabouts, people. So, this podcast is brought to you by the ActiPack, the custom-designed information stall pack. Okay, this is so interesting. I actually had to ask for this sponsor. So, say you're an activist for some cause, whether it's for animal rights, environmental issues, social issues, whatever, right? This is a product that makes it easy as hell to be able to get out there and get your message out. You first go to their website and go through the customization of your materials, such as a banner, leaflets, and so on. Once that's completed, you will purchase the ActiPack, and then it will be sent to you. The ActiPack comes in a portable case that folds out to be your table, and stored in convenient little compartments are all your promotional materials that you've already custom made. Voila! You can't make information stalls any easier than that. So, go to www.actipack.com/offer and type in the code name Adam595 and you can get a 10% discount. I myself have a prototype of the ActiPack, and you know what? It's damn handy. I couldn't recommend it enough. Also, this podcast is brought to you by my triad of sponsorship, providing the points of preservation for this podcast. My triad at the moment still consisting of Russell Brand, Caroline Lucas MP, and Sir Patrick Stewart. All these individuals, ladies and gentlemen, have agreed to co-fund this podcast with the condition that right at the end of their obligation, they spend at least 10 minutes on this show talking about science and sustainability when applied to society. So, I'd just like to personally thank those. I will be tweeting those guys when this YouTube upload is up. For those of you who enjoy this podcast, please also consider smoke signal, tweet, email, whatever you got to do to thank these individuals, Russell Brand, Caroline Lucas and Sir Patrick Stewart, for sponsoring this show, because the more of us that thank them, the more likely they will be to come onto the show. So thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it. But anyway, on to the topic du jour, as it were, is the 10th outing into questions that I've had. So let's dive into these right now. Question 1. Do you think your current methods are apt, or could they be changed to be more effective? Okay, well, there's always room for improvement. I mean, no one's perfect, and considering that we live in an emergent reality, one must always be striving to improve our methods. I mean, when I first started out, I have to admit that I was more fanatical than I was an appropriate advocate. And it took me some time to settle into a calmer and more measured approach. But in the name of improving and expanding my effectiveness, I've personally experimented with many different approaches to activism, even to the point of conducting an impromptu Q&A session on the train from London for a group of strangers. There are a few approaches which have proven effective, and as such, I've kept them in my repertoire, such as free hugs, megaphoning. Have I always been 100% effective with them? Not always. I have learned a lot of this on the fly, actually. However, they have proven to be some of my best tools. So as long as they continue to work, I will continue to use them. I am, however, always on the lookout for new ideas, for ways I can communicate and promote a sustainable train of thought in a more effective way. I mean, that's the whole idea with employing a principle of science into a lot of your thinking. When you start to develop a scientific worldview, as it were, your decisions are more based around scientific ideas, such as testing of ideas, seeing if you can replicate results. Always question things. Be open to letting new data replace old, disproven data. You see, this is where the Socratic method really shows its effectiveness. Just for those of you who don't know, the Socratic method is the practice of asking questions to inspire discussion and further questions, and thus more active understanding on both people's parts. Or hopefully on both people's parts. So it's not to convert anyone, but just to have an honest conversation without trying to force any ideology. I mean, kids have a natural inclination for inquiry. I remember, the kind of things, the kind of questions I would ask as a kid. It's amazing. My mum had an answer. So I think teaching and encouraging Socratic questioning to children of all ages can really hone and maintain our will to question and understand the world around us from formative years up. Now, sure, you can guide the conversation with questions, and you can ask them in ways which expose them to different ways of thinking, but you're not arguing or actively describing your beliefs in the hope that they will agree. You're not trying to foist your opinion. And this can easily escalate into ideological conflict, where the person has, say the person has a belief, and it has been exposed to a foreign or perhaps even conflicting belief. Now, since it's easier for the human brain to remain with beliefs that it already has, there's comfort in the familiar, especially if any belief it is exposed to factually replaces an existing belief, because that entails work of undoing, unlearning and relearning. With most things, it's a case of building upon the beliefs and knowledge that we have. We're very rarely relearning how to breathe, how to speak, even the configuration of our place of work. Not many people, I suspect, went to their place of work this morning expecting to relearn their way around the same office. But coming back to the point, present a person with an argument, and they will start thinking about whether they agree, whether it comports to what they believe, and if it's a reasonable amount of effort for them at that point in time to change that particular belief, change that out for your update, then they will take the information on board to digest. If those criteria are met, then they can. It's what we call are they particularly open to that kind of idea? Are they in that receptive frame of mind? But with Socratic questioning, when you ask someone a question, they are generating the answer. You're not telling them the answer, they're telling you the answer, right? And it might not be the answer you want or that you hope to hear, because that's irrelevant. It's their answer at that point in time. Okay, and you have to respect that. For one thing, their answer is an indicator for their understanding on a topic, and also how far this person will discuss this topic with you. And you have to respect those things. I myself, I never started off with that particular approach. I had to learn this in addition to unlearning a lot of unproductive and negative thought patterns. The different thought and also the thought patterns I'd have to express into any social situation. This is why I think self-development is critical to effective activism. And I'll tell you what, another tool which I try to apply as much as possible is nonviolent communication. This means of being aware of human needs and the will to work to meet them in regards to how we communicate with each other. If we're not acknowledging of the needs of others when communicating with them, how effective are you going to be? Not just in the task of planting seeds of thought, but also to have connected with and honoured them for the unique person that they are. When we are more patient, empathic and kind with our language, it enables us to share social relations in a non-combative manner. So much we see around us people talking at each other and using manipulative and forceful language or violent language to get what we want, even if it's just to affect the other person in some negative way. And there's a reason why we react in the ways that we do. Our actions reflect our states of mind due to met or unmet needs. The more basic the need, the more desperate the action. And when we are aware of this phenomena and work to respect the needs of others and want to help them so we can all have our needs met, we have, what the late Marshall Rosenberg calls making life wonderful. If you wish to find out more, I'll pop some links in the video description about Rosenberg's work and the Centre for Nonviolent Communication. Okay, so question 2. Besides the podcast and the free hugs, what changes have you brought about? Now, this is a difficult question to answer in principle. I mean, seeing as I've been active for a few years, and it's virtually impossible to tell exactly what kind of effects I've had, like how many people have I actually reached. Could there even be such a way to measure that? I mean, you'd have to have access to so many databases, but then again, that can't even account for word of mouth. So, how can you measure that? Interesting. But we need to remember that these are ideas that oftentimes need to pass through layers of indoctrination and backwards rationalisation intact in order to then be considered. So with that in mind, you cannot expect to turn anyone around on a dime. These ideas even sometimes take years for the person to come around to them, and even then they might still have to struggle with initial stages of awareness. There's this is so critical to understand, because we're not taught critical thinking. We're not taught how to think. We're taught what to think. And that's why sometimes this can be very difficult, because, these unproductive ways of thinking become ingrained like any dominant way of thinking. But, we all have to go through that initial painful awareness phase. Sometimes it's painful, or mostly it's uncomfortable to go through a change of paradigm. It can feel alienating. I've spoken with quite a few people who, after a year or so of mulling it over from time to time, they've actually come back to me and either apologised for being reactionary at the time of me giving them these insights, or merely stated that I had a point, and that they will keep an open mind to these ideas in the future. I even have friends now who are now sounding more like me just before I discovered the Zeitgeist movement. It's weird. At which time I was definitely doing more than my fair share of complaining. Nowadays I go one better and I talk about solutions as well. But it's really interesting to see people follow the same kinds of twists and turns on their way towards knowledge as I did. It's like any learning process. You'll have certain phases where you concentrate more energy on a particular issue or skill, and you'll also have phases where you switch it up. Just because most of us are on differing levels of awareness doesn't mean we can't help each other up, and it doesn't mean that anyone's superior or inferior, right? Anyone who may be superior to you on a particular subject will be inferior to another person on another subject, right? So it does not matter. It's irrelevant. As an individual, I know that I haven't changed much of the world. However, one thing I do know is that I've changed a damn sight more than I ever did or could before I was actually armed with the correct information and the appropriate approach. Try saying that 5 times with your teeth in. And the right direction to aim for. But no, it's always been on like little things that are easy to manage. Now I'm asking people to think about a completely different way of living. It can be. I've parodied making it a dramatic thing. It's not always such a dramatic thing, because people can always sort of like put it out of their mind, or just like change the subject or something whenever people aren't sort of like faced and backed into a corner with these kinds of ideas, because that's not the approach that we use. And if they do encounter this train of thought with that kind of approach, then that's very negative for the aims of TZM. If TZM hopes to succeed, we need to be non-violent with our communications. But when you come to the realization that the burden of responsibility for changing the world does not lie on anyone's individual shoulders, but rather on all of us, you will hopefully be less and less discouraged and frustrated when a single activist's efforts don't magically lift us into a better world. You know, when you place too high of an expectation upon yourself for something that you haven't done as much as other things, and maybe as a result are not as good as in this area, if you place too high of an expectation on yourself, your natural level of skill in that area is relatively low, so you're less likely to succeed. And when you don't succeed, because you have that high expectation, you think, oh, failure, I'm a failure. But no, the responsibility ultimately lies equally on all of our shoulders. But also on none of our shoulders either at the same time, because we didn't choose to be born into this world, so therefore we had this responsibility foisted upon us. But we are alive, and thus we have the opportunity to affect change. So I consider it to be a moral choice to actually start taking at least some right action to create a better world, right? But this is, without a doubt, the most difficult transition that humanity has had to face yet. So if we fail, then it can be understandable considering what we're up against. But don't let that be excuse. Don't let that be an excuse to slack off. All right? We don't exactly have forever. That's another paradox about activism at this point in the future. We must both recognise that we need to create the shift as soon as possible while we still can, but at the same time we have to have the patience and non-pushy demeanour. We have to have that non-violent approach. So to not put someone on edge even before you've promoted this view, see, that idea is so counter to the world we've used to living in that it's sometimes taken as extremely offensive. So yeah, anyway, question 3. What are your own hopes for the future, and how do you hope to achieve them? Okay, I'd say my ultimate goal is to become self-sustaining, off the grid, in the sense of, actually having a self-sustaining dwelling of my own, and living as self-sufficiently as possible. But generating my own energy, growing most of my own food, that sort of thing. The more I can alleviate my own need for the system, the better. And at the same time, doing so acts as an example that it can be done. Right? I dare say maybe there's a couple of people on YouTube that have done video series of how they've constructed an earthship, for instance, or some other self-sustaining dwelling. But as for how it can be done, I'm still working on that, It will most likely involve buying a piece of land or something similar, maybe even a piece of woodland. The paradox of using money to escape money is not lost on me, okay? That's a paradox that a lot of TZM activists do primarily come up against, in the form of an ad hominem, where people say, "Oh, you want us to have a system without money, but you used money to buy that car that you drive. You used money to buy the diesel that goes in its tank." But they're just expressing a paradox of post-monetary activism. Post-scarcity advocation. I mean, it's that kind of thinking that we currently exist in the monetary paradigm, and we have to use the monetary paradigm for the time being while it exists, because using it does put us in a better position of being able to get out of the system. Think about it like a rocket that needs to get to space. in order to get out of Earth's atmosphere, it has to get out of Earth's gravity well. So if you think about the gravity well being the amount of money that it would cost to purchase the necessary resources to get off the grid, that and depending on how many people. As for career, I'm currently working on that. I'd love to go into teaching. I've been researching into the necessary qualifications that I would need to get. But yeah, it's going to be there's a lot changing in my life at the moment, so it's a matter of getting that in order so I can then start really pursuing the kind of life that I want. So in a sense, having to get some sort of steady job or career, that's paradoxically part of how you outgrow money. Where I just appreciate that. Yes, it is a paradox, and I'm fine with it. Because there's nothing that I myself can personally. I can't just start printing my own money and just saying, here, I don't want to use your money. I'm going to buy my groceries with these instead. Right? Can't just do that. So I have to, play the game that I'm in as ethical a way as possible. So much is up for sale and is tainted when you have a monetary system, because the more things that can be exploited, the more money can be made, the more industries can be created, more jobs can be made and created. So you have to see the environment around you as a mass of things to exploit and process, and consume and use for what you can. That's the whole ethos of capitalism. You have to walk that tightrope of integrity. Whether you can have any kind of substantive amount of integrity while operating in a monetary system in a manner that can gain you the necessary resources, which you can then swap for, exchange for your resources that you carry on living, I'm not sure, but I'm working on that. Anyway, question 4. With people petitioning and protesting against corporate takeovers of local businesses and areas, would it be too quick to ask if people are beginning to become unsatisfied with corporationism? Not entirely sure what... I assume corporationism is just the belief in and advocation of corporations as a means of doing things. I wouldn't say it's too quick at all. The amount of people vocally unsatisfied with the system are easy enough to hear, and I think the dissatisfaction runs even deeper than that. There are enough people to create a massive voice of dissatisfaction, and especially with things like the internet. The amount of self-claimed social critics on YouTube, amazing. But especially in a country like the UK, where it's almost as though idle complaining is a national pastime. As a side note, one thing I love to do to derail this in other people is to ask them what they advocate as a solution. And most of the time they will either shut up or they will actually start talking about what they think are solutions. So it gets people off of a complaining bent and then onto a thinking, all right, what do we do about this problem? Because at least then the person you're engaging with is now adding to the conversation now, This is again where Socratic questioning comes in as a good tool of communication. Talk to people, ask questions, take on their answers, and see how far you can express this worldview with people through these interactions. All this becomes possible because you've listened to them and made mental notes of your common ground with them. Upon that common ground is where you plant the seeds of thought. And just as a side tangent, this is where we approach another paradox of activism. The very practice is one of a forward motion, of action taking, of self-development, questioning, learning, loving, and it's so damn easy to get caught up in the emotional motivation that also builds. And at the same time, you have to adapt your approach in as relatable as possible and be as non-violent as possible. In some ways, some of your thought processes may become confused because you're both taking in information, and any follow-up questions have to be informed and dynamic. You can't always write and read from a script, even though you can small chunk learned and structured thoughts into a conversation, and they should be the muscle of the conversation as opposed to the skeleton, if you see the analogy. Anyway, question 5. I've got a question for regarding understanding the RBE. Most of the people on this planet are religious, so when speaking to these people, do they really care because God to them is more important? I guess when it comes to religious beliefs, they are specifically designed to be emotional things that are defended against any contrary information. It depends what their religion has taught them in terms of our relationship to this God and our relationship to the planet. Obviously our relationship to the planet can be easily measured, and from that relationship we can tell that there are actual functional dependencies built into our biology. We call them life needs. Right? We have a pair of lungs which require oxygen from the environment, which is produced by the trees. The lungs are the means that the body gets oxygen from the environment. But the oxygen that comes from the trees, which are then produced from the seeds in the soil. The soil, which does not need to be poisoned by fracking fluid, for instance. You get the picture. In terms of Christianity, it depends whether we were given the earth to have dominion over, or whether we take the on earth as it is in heaven idea from the Lord's Prayer, which implies that we need to be proper stewards of the earth. This also bubbles up a more delicious question, which is, do you think that God has a monetary system in heaven? If a God has to take precedence over the very earth we live on and require for our very survival, then such a deity is unworthy of the worship that it demands. Anyway, question 6. If someone told you that science is based on faith meaning you believe in science, what would be your response to that person? In a nutshell, I think Tim Minchin's quote from his poem Storm sums it up pretty well when he said that science adjusts its views based on what's observed. Faith is the denial of observation so that belief can be preserved. On a certain level, this claim that science is based on faith or requires it is an attempt at levelling the playing field. The reason could be because they recognise their way of thinking has less explanatory power than yours, in which case they will be trying to make your way of thinking just as flimsy as theirs, and thus, we're all being equally stupid. Or it could just be because your frame of reference is so foreign to them that they would feel better as long as you were looking at it from the same way they are. This is what some apologists, particularly Christian and Muslim, have done, that they say that you've taken the holy book, take the holy book on its own word and from a perspective of wanting to believe anyway, and it will make sense to you. Well, of course, if you approach a particular claim with a will to believe it, any flaws in its premises are more likely to be filtered out of your perception. It's known in self-development as a selective focus, right? Or as critical thinkers will call it, confirmation bias. Right? Now, obviously, this is perfectly understandable. We humans have learned through trial and error, and it's just an unreasonable expectation on the brain to constantly be re-evaluating and switching out beliefs. We have to have some firm, reliable understandings about the universe in order to navigate it with any confidence. The trick is to be sort of doing both at the same time. This is another paradox of activism, especially if it entails the advocacy of a scientific worldview. On one hand, you have to remain open to having your current beliefs updated, but whenever we can reaffirm what is proven to be demonstrably true at any point, we have to take that under advisement as well, because that has been demonstrated. But anyway, question 7. What would you say to someone who told you that human wants are infinite? Well, one of the logic bombs, as I call them, that I like to use about that are that wants are what are desired, needs are what are required. Or I might have said it the other way around, but either way it works. I mean, needs are required, wants are desired. And a desire isn't, if you don't have a desire fulfilled, you're not going to, that isn't life-threatening. But something that is a need, when that is taken away, then that is threatening to the very well-being of the individual. But I guess human wants, they can be created by many means as something perpetually unfulfillable, that nothing will ever be enough. This is the kind of idea that marketing and advertising goes upon, creating these wants that always need more and more. If you think about it, it's actually creating what is called in psychiatric circles as type A personality disorder. But this is also the idea behind the profit motive. You can never have enough profit. So the human brain is essentially vulnerable to the idea of something that isn't even necessary for life, or even destructive to life, being perceived as a life need. It's easy for us to conflate the two. This is what, as I said, this is what I call the conflation of both needs and wants. I like to say that, as I said earlier, that needs are what are required, wants are what are desired. But to conflate the two, then you've got problems. With this formula, you shouldn't be surprised when a mother and daughter become obsessed with submitting themselves in multiple expensive plastic surgery to look just like Katie Price, and have it all financed by a sugar daddy, or as are otherwise known as provider males. We shouldn't be surprised. I find it culturally disgusting that these and I feel a massive empathy for them, because they've submitted themselves as not people within themselves, but a person who sees himself as a fetal form of a likeness of someone else. So, they're not saying I'm actually the real Katie Price. They're not pretending to actually be that person, but they want to copy them and take what they value in that person unto themselves. And while that's an admirable thing to an extent, if you're sacrificing your own individuality for the sake of imbuing it with someone else's look, then you're abandoning who you are, and you're not growing as a person. And I feel a huge empathy for these two women because of that. But when we see past the superficial layers of rationalization that are created for these overblown behavioral patterns, we recognize that the application of infinite wants is just ridiculous. It's impossible. Who craves for absolutely everything that exists on a planet of finite resources? Is this a sustainable value to have? This idea is even ridiculous on another level. If wants are infinite, then there really is no limit to what a person would desire. Do you constantly desire for fecal matter? I want fecal matter all around me. No, you don't want that. So obviously there is some limit to human desires, right? But anyway, question 8. If someone said support our troops, our brave troops, what would you say? Okay, well, first off, I'd ask them why. Why should we support the troops? Not many people actively recognise why the soldiers are being trained to kill and die. It's certainly not for the kind of damage that having served in the military can cause to the human being. Not just, the human beings serving, but the human beings affected by their service. The kinds of knock-on effects of having been exposed to some of the worst things that humanity is capable of, and even being under orders to perpetuate the same kinds of horrors. Most likely you will be told that they fought for Queen and country, or fight for our freedom. However, if that were the case, if they were serving a truly massive charge of protection, having the biggest slice of governmental funding to power their industry, then why do so many veterans not get the help they need to overcome the horrors they've been faced with, and how to reintegrate into a supposedly civilized society? Could it be that the establishment itself is using those who serve for their own ends and then discard them when their service is up? The system itself uses all of us to prop it up with our economic activity, our tacit consent, and even ideological support. Now, this would be fine if the system itself worked for everyone and was sustainable. Is that the case with the current monetary market system? There's also this idea that when we realise that someone has served, we must thank them for their service. It's one thing I've noticed in Adam Kokesh's videos. People would say, "Oh, thank you for your service," when they realise he served with the Marines. I can understand why they're doing it, because when you realise you're talking to a serviceman or veteran, you feel obliged to parrot the societally encouraged line, "Thank you for your service," which is, as you can imagine, a way to honour the fact that they went through something difficult and dangerous, all while supposedly protecting something larger than themselves, which is true in a certain way. The military, the establishment, the global map of military activity is much larger than the single soldier. But that doesn't mean that the larger thing they were fighting for is anything honourable. For example, deploying troops to take by force and guard the oil fields in the Middle East. Deploying troops to urban areas during times of social unrest in order to restore order, or as I like to call it, to force compliance. Even using soldiers, putting them in front of a drone control system and have them remotely bombing buildings and killing innocent people and children under orders, because force is supposedly how we get shit done. And then there's as another slight tangent, we have the gall to complain about refugees who are desperately trying to get into our country to take our jobs and ruin our country. The news feeds, it feeds that hate. Even interviewing average Joes from my hometown of Gillingham, telling the reporters about a group of refugees that tried to get into their car and then later on they hit their child in the face. This is of course to fuel the indignant xenophobic view that if you have problems so bad that you have to flee your entire life, then you better take it somewhere else, because we don't want any of it. We don't want anything to do with your suffering, because it reminds us that there are massive problems in the world that we actually have an opportunity to do something about at any point in our lives. Even if it's just the smallest thing, we have that opportunity, but we think, nah, can't be bothered. And you notice that a lot of people who say, oh, we should start helping the people at home first, a lot of the time, not all of the time, but a lot of the time, the kinds of people that say that, they're the kind of people that wouldn't even care anyway. These are the kind of people who just prop up the system, and they don't actually have a good communal social interest about them. They just think, oh no, yeah, we need to sort out our problems. In other words, I want the governments to be able to solve the problems that are directly affecting me first before, But then, of course, when bodies of drowned children wash up on beaches, suddenly we stop calling them migrants as much, or immigrants, but we actually start viewing them as human beings. It's so weird that the media and our politicians need something as dramatic as a photo of a young infant boy washed up dead on a beach because his parents wanted to get him away from the bombing that who's bombing Syria at the moment. But yeah, suddenly we see a child washed up on the beach and we think, oh no, they're human beings. We start seeing them as people and desperate human beings who have more in common with every one of us than how we differ. We suddenly start to actually recognise that they are fleeing war-torn and tyranny-gripped nations. The kind of conditions created by the conflict, often military, around the world. So to summarise, we have swallowed this idea of honouring those who put their lives on the line and taking the lives of others, but when the repercussions of that bloodshed comes back to haunt us, we don't like it. So there's only two ways to actually support the troops, as far as I can tell. Either bring them home, or mount a campaign to completely alter the nature of their job to that of problem solver and negotiator, and all the support jobs that would require that to be global in scope. Wouldn't that be a good incarnation of the military? Either that, or the TV show Robot Wars. Take that idea and replace human-involved warfare with that. Just have people piloting mindless automaton machines. Right? But if the machines become self-aware, then you boys got to figure out somehow else to figure out your differences. Anyway, question 9. What are your views on genetic modification for means of improving humans? I haven't fully formed a solid opinion about even genetic modification or manipulation, let alone human genetic manipulation. I recognise that it's an exciting possibility, and it can make things very, very interesting. However, there are inherent dangers with doing that sort of thing, especially at first within a monetary system, because the kinds of modifications that are advantageous to any particular profit-making venture are the ones that are going to be applied, and that's not necessarily anything that has a pro-human approach, because profit itself is not pro-human; it's anti-human. But in terms of vanity, that's a major pitfall of using this with our current values. And on top of that, the fact that money itself would make this into the biggest catalyst for creating an elite group of, in effect, superhumans, while all those who can't afford it will become a physically inferior underclass. Some even think even a subspecies of human eventually. This is very dangerous, and it's a good thing that right now it is actually illegal, because if it were legalised before we outgrew the need for money, then essentially it would become a eugenics wet dream. So does vanity serve a beneficial role in human thinking? And would genetic manipulation be the perfect thing to make that spin out of control? I've seen no evidence that a human society is better off if they value vanity, because I think a human's value comes from the kind of person they are and the greatness they strive to achieve and become. When we seek self-improvement over self-adulation, when we seek social interest over self-interest, when we do these things, not only do we make the world a better place, but we're even able to do that because we've worked towards and adopted a position of higher value as a member of society and as a person. When humans embrace the goodness and potential goodness, then it makes vanity completely pointless. There's no need for it when, it's a bit like the self-development sort of principle, that the difference between confidence and arrogance is that with confidence, there's the value there. With arrogance, there's no value. It's a bit like a box saying having the word gold printed on it, and one box has gold on it and it's empty. The other box has gold on it and it's actually got gold in it. But yeah, there's that. Question 10. In an NLRBE, I assume there wouldn't be any armies or any police. So what would happen if there was a situation where the people needed an army or something? For example, an uprising of some sort to an alien invasion of the planet. Okay, well, largely this depends on what stage of the transition that any of this occurs. You see, the shift from here to there is subtle at times and takes place over a large period of time. So it's likely that we will go through certain phases, where different conditions, even different values, are prevalent for a while and then fade away. Very much like what we know today as trends and so forth. There are certain periods of time which exhibit particular cultural characteristics. For instance, if I were to ask you what the difference was between the 60s and the 90s, you're not necessarily going to give the objective answer of 30 years. You're going to describe the culture and events during that time, most likely. It is entirely possible that during the transition to an NLRBE, that there is a phase of different sections of the population running out of food due to breakdown of supply lines, the existing supply lines, or even maybe preliminary supply lines that try to get put out but don't have enough, either resource support or social support. And hopefully, if the necessary social and resource support is active by then people can reach out to those people with help on getting those needs met and ensure they become self-sufficient. While we work to create the kind of system that is accessible by every human being to provide a high and liberated standard of living, those in need are being helped so they can connect with and enjoy the benefits of a system that are also contributing towards the improvement of. Not with money, but with ideas, with usage stats and feedback at the most passive level, and with the most active level being the contribution of time, expertise and positivity. So, should we advocate for armies to defend us with force? Or should they be problem solvers to deal with the reason why we are being attacked in the first place? If the phase we're talking about is when we have shed the last remnants of the monetary paradigm, then there will likely not be anyone around who thinks that building empires through force is a good way to live. Very much like there probably most likely isn't many people around these days that think that sneezing on a wound will help heal it. That was a belief back in the Bronze Age, but it's not a belief now because we know more, and we've grown into better knowledge and applied it. If the context was before we fully transition, then a single commune without any kind of technological form of defence would be overrun, like a stronghold in the middle of a zombie outbreak. It would just be overrun. This is why off-grid communities need to be networking on a larger scale level. This way it turns a scattered number of communes into a node network that survives better due to higher numbers, resources to utilise, and larger geographical area covered between them. When such a network begins to spread to form new nodes spreading in all directions, it becomes viral and even malignant, to use Ken's term. This, in a sense, is the physical beginnings, or the potential physical beginnings of a natural law resource-based economy. In terms of defence against an alien invasion, then I'd say we probably have, a good enough means to communicate, at least at first, outwards towards a, maybe some potential form of life that is coming over here to do whatever. But we have the technological means and the understandings about weaponry and defence to apply that in an outward fashion, if need be, for the purposes of direct self-defence. If we were starting to be attacked by a visiting alien species, then we're not necessarily going to say, all right, okay, we give up, destroy us, because no species that ever did that ever survived. It's the species that have engage that self-defense that have always survived. So, not that I advocate any kind of violence, initially. Violence has to be, it can't be anything other than a last resort for self-defense. And I think we have more than the technological and actual technical know-how to get that done. But anyway, that's all the questions that I'm going to answer for this time. Thank you very much for your questions. Make sure you keep them coming in. Just to remind you again, this podcast was brought to you by the ActiPack. It's a portable sort of like information store that you can customise yourself and get sent to you. If you go to www.actipack.com/offer, and you can enter the code name Adam595 and get 10% discount, because that is awesome. Considering how much they charge, but this podcast was also brought to you by my triad of sponsorship, providing the points of preservation for this podcast. They've each agreed to co-fund this podcast in exchange for the act of, at the end of their obligation, to come on for at least 10 minutes to discuss science and sustainability when applied to society. So thank you very much, guys. Russell Brand, Caroline Lucas MP, and Sir Patrick Stewart, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for providing this money. Russell sends me money in wet plastic bags that I have to dry in the radiator. Caroline Lucas sends me money via carrier pigeon, which sometimes gets shot down by a neighbour. Sometimes she has to put little Kevlar vests on them. And Patrick Stewart actually beams me my money using his Replicator 3D printer. So thank you very much, guys. And ladies and gentlemen, I also encourage you to thank my triad of sponsorship for providing the points of preservation. The more we thank them, the more likely they will be to come on to actually talk to us. So send them an email, tweet, smoke signal, email, whatever you got to do to thank these individuals for coming on. The usual plug again is also for the Zeitgeist Movement Defined, realising a new train of thought. If you go to www.thezeitgeistmovement.com/orientation, you can order a copy for relatively small price. If you want a physical copy, or if you want a PDF of it, you can download it for free. But that's me. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your questions, and I hope you all have a wonderful life. Take care.